there is growing scientific consensus that a simple, free, and often overlooked behavior, exposing your eyes to natural sunlight within the first 30 minutes of waking, can have an outsized effect on your overall health, particularly in reducing your risk of stroke. This may sound surprising, even too good to be true, but the research is clear and compelling. Morning sunlight exposure activates a cascade of biological processes in the brain and body that regulate cardiovascular health, hormone balance, and inflammation. 3 core contributors to stroke risk. What's more impressive is that studies show this habit alone may reduce stroke risk by as much as 50% over time. When we talk about stroke, we often think of it as a sudden catastrophic event, a blood clot or hemorrhage that happens out of nowhere. But the truth is that stroke is almost always the result of long-term physiological imbalances that accumulate silently over years. These include high blood pressure, chronic inflammation, poor sleep, dysregulated cortisol patterns, and metabolic dysfunction. Interestingly, all of these systems, sleep-wake cycles, blood pressure, immune response, and hormone regulation, are governed in large part by your circadian rhythm and what synchronizes your circadian rhythm more powerfully than anything else. Morning sunlight. Your circadian rhythm is essentially your body's internal clock. It regulates the timing of countless biological processes. When your heart rate increases, when your digestion activates, when your body releases certain hormones, and even when your cells repair themselves. The anchor for this clock is light, and specifically the quality and timing of light that enters your eyes. When you step outside in the morning and allow natural sunlight to reach your eyes, the light stimulates a group of cells in your retina called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, IRGCs. These cells are not involved in vision. Instead, they send powerful signals to the brain's master clock located in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN, of the hypothalamus. The SCN then coordinates downstream systems that regulate everything from the secretion of cortisol, the hormone responsible for wakefulness and alertness, to the dilation of blood vessels, the firing patterns of your autonomic nervous system, and even the production of nitric oxide, which plays a key role in keeping blood vessels flexible and responsive. This chain reaction affects how your cardiovascular system functions throughout the day. When these systems are properly aligned and functioning efficiently, your risk of hypertension, atherosclerosis, and blood clot formation, major precursors to stroke, drops dramatically. Multiple studies published in peer-reviewed journals support the correlation between early morning light exposure and improved cardiovascular health. For example, research has shown that people who receive daily exposure to natural light in the morning tend to have more stable blood pressure throughout the day, lower levels of C-reactive protein, no marker of inflammation, and more consistent sleep-wake cycles, all of which are associated with a significantly reduced risk of both ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke. Moreover, early morning sunlight helps to regulate the body's production of melatonin, a hormone best known's role in sleep, but also critically involved in cardiovascular and immune function. Exposure to bright light early in the day suppresses melatonin production at the right time and ensures its optimal release later in the evening. This timing is essential because misaligned melatonin cycles are associated with poor sleep quality, higher resting heart rate, and increased sympathetic nervous system activity, all of which place added strain on the cardiovascular system. The brain and body function optimally when they are in sync with the natural rhythms of light and dark. Morning sunlight acts as the primary cue that tells your body it's time to be awake, alert, and active. When this cue is missing or delayed, your internal systems fall out of sync, leading to hormonal confusion, metabolic disruptions, and elevated stroke risk. So while the idea that morning sunlight can slash your stroke risk by 50% sound like a health headline, it's backed by robust neuroscience and physiology. This habit isn't just good advice. It's a cornerstone of preventative medicine supported by hard science. When you wake up each morning, your brain begins scanning the environment for cues that signal the start of the biological day. The most critical of these cues is light, specifically sunlight. The moment natural light hits your eyes, it initiates a powerful chain of neurological processes that start in a small but vitally important structure in the brain known as the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN. Located in the hypothalamus, The SCN acts as the master clock of the body, orchestrating your circadian rhythms, the internal biological process that repeat roughly every 24 hours. This system doesn't just govern your sleep and wake cycles, it regulates hormone release, body temperature, metabolism, immune function, and even cardiovascular activity. And its proper function is entirely dependent on your exposure to light. Especially in the early part of the day, the process begins when photons from the sun enter your eyes and strike the retina, where specialized cells called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, EPRGCs, detect the presence of blue light. These EPRGCs don't contribute to vision, but instead send direct signals to the SCN through the retinohypothalamic tract. When the SCN receives this input, it essentially sets your body's internal clock, aligning it with the external environment. This alignment is known as circadian entrainment. When your internal clock is entrained to the natural day-night cycle, all systems in the body run more efficiently. When it's not, you experience what scientists call circadian misalignment, which can lead to everything from mood disorders and cognitive decline to metabolic dysfunction and increased risk of cardiovascular disease, including stroke. One of the first things the SCN does upon receiving this light signal is initiate a properly timed cortisol release. Cortisol is often misunderstood as simply a stress hormone, but its primary role in the morning is to promote alertness, mobilize energy stores, and prepare the body for the demands of the day. When cortisol is released at the right time, it acts as a powerful anti-inflammatory agent and supports healthy blood pressure and vascular function. But if this cortisol pulse is delayed or mistimed, as happens when you don't receive morning light, it can lead to elevated cortisol levels later in the day when high cortisol is no longer adaptive, but instead be harmful. Chronically elevated or mistimed cortisol is a major risk factor for stroke as it contributes to persistent inflammation, vascular damage, and blood pressure instability. The SCN also sends time of day signals to other systems throughout the body, including the cardiovascular system. For example, your heart rate, blood vessel elasticity, and blood clotting tendencies all follow daily rhythms that are governed by this central clock. Studies have shown that stroke risk is not evenly distributed throughout the day, but instead peaks in the morning hours, often due to poorly regulated circadian signals. When your biological rhythms are misaligned, your body may experience abnormal spikes in blood pressure or impaired blood flow regulation in the early hours, increasing the risk of cerebrovascular events. Morning light serves as a reset button that calibrates these systems to function optimally at the correct time. In addition to hormonal and cardiovascular regulation, the SCN influences the autonomic nervous system, which controls involuntary functions like heart rate and digestion. Morning light helps shift the body from a sympathetic fight or flight state, common in chronically stressed individuals, toward a more balanced parasympathetic state, which supports recovery, calm, and cardiovascular stability. Over time, this shift contributes to lower baseline stress, improved vascular function, and a reduced likelihood of stroke, inducing blood pressure surges or clots. This entire system, the SCN, the EPRGCs, the hypothalamic pathways, and the downstream physiological responses, exists to synchronize you with the 24-hour rhythm of life on Earth. And it all hinges on one behavior: getting outside and exposing your eyes to sunlight shortly after waking. Without this daily synchronization, your body's internal timing falls apart, and the systems that keep your brain and heart healthy begin to deteriorate. Over days, weeks, and years, that misalignment builds up as risk, quiet, unnoticed, but deadly. The antidote begins with light, timing, and consistency. Stroke is not a sudden or isolated event. It is often the end result of years of underlying physiological imbalances that quietly build up within the body. What many people don't realize is that several of the most critical stroke risk factors, chronic inflammation, poor sleep, irregular cortisol patterns, and blood pressure instability, are deeply influenced by the body's circadian rhythm, and that rhythm is largely regulated by morning light exposure. When you expose your eyes to sunlight early in the day, you're not just waking up your mind, you're resetting your entire biological clock. That single act sends a powerful message to the brain and body, synchronizing dozens of systems and initiating processes that reduce inflammation, stabilize hormones, and optimize cardiovascular function. Chronic inflammation is one of the most well-established contributors to stroke risk. Inflammation damages the inner lining of blood vessels, promotes the buildup of arterial plaque, and increases the likelihood of blood clot formation. Morning sunlight exposure reduces systemic inflammation through multiple mechanisms. First, by regulating cortisol timing. Cortisol, when released in the right amounts and at the right time, typically shortly after waking, is anti-inflammatory. But if cortisol is mistimed due to lack of proper circadian cues, it can become persistently elevated or erratic, leading to chronic inflammation. Early sunlight exposure helps ensure that the cortisol pulse occurs naturally and efficiently, curbing unnecessary inflammatory activity throughout the day. Sleep quality is another critical factor. Poor sleep or irregular sleep-wake cycles have been repeatedly linked to increased stroke risk. That's because during deep sleep, the body undergoes restorative processes that repair blood vessels, regulate blood pressure, and clear metabolic waste from the brain. But these processes depend on the quality and regularity of the circadian rhythm. Without morning light to anchor that rhythm, sleep quality diminishes. Even if the duration appears sufficient, morning sunlight helps set the biological clock so that melatonin is released at the correct time in the evening, enabling deeper and more regenerative sleep. When sleep improves, so do cardiovascular repair processes and immune regulation, both of which are essential for long-term stroke prevention. Blood pressure regulation is another pathway through which morning light exposure reduces stroke risk. Blood pressure follows a daily rhythm, typically rising in the early morning and falling at night. This rhythm is controlled by circadian signaling. If circadian rhythms are disrupted due to insufficient light exposure, blood pressure can become unstable or remain elevated throughout the day. Over time, this sustained hypertension damages arterial walls and increases the likelihood of stroke. Research has shown that individuals who receive consistent exposure to natural morning light tend to have more stable, lower resting blood pressure and improved endothelial function, the latter being a key measure of vascular health. Even more intriguing is the role morning light plays in regulating metabolic health, which is also tied to stroke risk. Light exposure helps synchronize insulin sensitivity and glucose metabolism, reducing the likelihood of metabolic syndrome, a condition characterized by high blood pressure, high blood sugar, and abnormal cholesterol levels. Metabolic syndrome significantly increases the risk of stroke, especially ischemic stroke, which is caused by blocked blood flow to the brain. By aligning the timing of metabolic processes, morning sunlight helps reduce this risk from the ground up. In essence, early light acts like a master switch. It turns on the right systems at the right time, suppresses processes that would otherwise lead to disease, and ensures that the body's internal environment stays balanced and efficient. Every major stroke risk factor, be it high blood pressure, inflammation, or poor sleep, has a circadian component, and that component is modifiable through light. Morning sunlight isn't just a passive environmental factor, it's a powerful biological signal that actively drives health and resilience. Regularly exposing your eyes to natural light in the first 30 minutes after waking may seem like a small act, but it has a compounding effect on nearly every system involved in stroke prevention. It brings your internal rhythms into harmony with the world outside, and in doing so, builds a physiological foundation that is far more resistant to disease. Timing is everything when it comes to optimizing your health through morning light exposure. It's not simply about whether or not you get sunlight during the day. It's about when that exposure occurs. First 30 minutes after waking up represent a unique biological window during which your brain and body are most sensitive to light. This window determines how your circadian system aligns with the 24-hour day. When you step outside and expose your eyes to natural sunlight within that time frame, you activate a precise set of neurological and hormonal mechanisms that shape your health across the entire day. Delaying this exposure, even by an hour or two, can weaken or completely disrupt the signal, leading to misaligned rhythms and compounding health risks over time. As soon as you wake up, your brain is seeking environmental cues to establish what time of day it is. If it receives strong light input quickly, particularly in the blue spectrum of natural sunlight, the brain interprets this as confirmation that it is morning. This activates the suprachiasmatic nucleus and SCN, the master circadian clock, which begins to send synchronized timing signals to every organ system in the body. That includes your heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, and immune cells. These signals determine when hormones are released, when blood pressure rises, when digestion activates, and even when gene expression occurs. By delivering that light signal immediately upon waking, you ensure that your internal biological systems are working in concert, not in conflict. If you miss that critical window, those systems start to drift out of sync. Your cortisol release may be delayed, causing mental fog and energy crashes later in the morning. Your melatonin cycle might remain elevated, leading to grogginess or disrupted sleep the following night. Even worse, cardiovascular functions like blood pressure regulation and blood clotting behavior may become dysregulated. It's no coincidence that the majority of strokes occur in the early morning hours. When the body systems are not properly synchronized, that's when the risk of vascular becomes highest. Morning sunlight acts as a stabilizing force that suppresses these fluctuations and encourages smooth transitions across biological states. One of the most important effects of early morning light exposure is the suppression of melatonin. Melatonin is the hormone that signals to the body that it's time to sleep. Its production begins in the evening and peaks in the middle of the night, but it must be turned off in the morning in order for you to feel alert and for your body to begin daily repair metabolic and cardiovascular processes. If light enters the eyes too late or not at all, melatonin lingers in the bloodstream, blunting alertness and interfering with your natural rise in cortisol. This creates a state of biological confusion where your body is neither fully awake nor properly asleep, and that confusion has cascading effects on blood pressure, heart rate variability, and blood vessel tone. Timing also affects the release of dopamine, a neurotransmitter responsible for motivation, focus, and overall mood. Morning sunlight triggers a dopamine pulse via specific rational pathways. But again, this pulse is time sensitive. When you receive natural light in that early window, dopamine is released in sync with the body's natural rhythm. This not only supports mental clarity and emotional resilience, but also enhances cardiovascular performance by reducing stress-induced vascular constriction. Delayed or absent light exposure reduces this dopamine pulse, which may lead to increased anxiety, poor motivation, and unstable autonomic nervous system activity, all of which are linked to increased stroke risk over time. Many people try to compensate for a late start by using artificial indoor lighting, but this rarely provides the same effect. Most indoor lights, even bright ones, lack the full spectrum intensity needed to trigger proper circadian signaling. They may help you see, but they do not send the same neurological messages to the SCN. Only sunlight, especially during the early hours, when it contains a strong blue light component, can perform this function with full biological impact. By consistently exposing your eyes to sunlight within 30 minutes of waking, you're sending the strongest possible signal to your body. It's morning, and it's time to optimize function. That signal calibrates every other system downstream. Miss the timing, and the signal weakens. Repeat it consistently, and the body learns to operate in rhythm with the natural world, creating resilience, balance, and long-term protection against cardiovascular disease, including stroke. One of the most common misconceptions about light exposure is that any light will do. People often assume that turning on a bright indoor lamp or opening the blinds is sufficient to set their biological clock. But the truth is that the type and intensity of light you receive in the morning matters immensely, especially when it comes to influencing your circadian rhythm and reducing stroke risk. Natural sunlight contains a unique spectrum of light wavelengths and a level of brightness that cannot be replicated by artificial indoor lighting. And that difference isn't just academic. It has profound implications for your cardiovascular health, hormonal balance, and brain function. To activate the circadian system effectively, the brain requires a certain threshold of light intensity. Outdoor sunlight, even on a cloudy day, delivers anywhere from 1,000 to 100,000 luxto measurement of light intensity. In comparison, typical indoor lighting ranges from just 100 to 1,000 lux. That's a tenfold and often hundredfold difference. Your circadian clock, which governs your sleep, wake cycles, hormone release, and autonomic nervous system, is sensitive to natural light intensity. When you're outside in direct sunlight, specialized photoreceptors in the eyes, the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, EPRGCs, are fully activated. These cells don't contribute to vision. Instead, they powerful timing signals to the brain, specifically to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN. This input is what tells the brain it's morning. It's time to coordinate the body's functions for the day. However, when you try to rely on indoor light, that activation simply doesn't happen at the necessary level. Even if the light appears bright to your eyes, it lacks the blue light intensity and full spectrum wavelength that your biological systems are designed to respond to. Glass windows, too, block a significant portion of the light spectrum, especially the UV and some blue light components, which are essential for this signaling process. That means sitting by a sunny window may be visually pleasant, but biologically ineffective in aligning your circadian rhythm. As a result, your body may continue operating on an inconsistent internal clock, which leads to dysregulated cortisol, poor melatonin suppression, and erratic blood pressure patterns, all of which increase the long-term risk of stroke. Another common error people make is wearing sunglasses during their morning light exposure. While sunglasses are important for eye protection during extended exposure or midday sun, wearing them in the first 10 to 20 minutes of morning sunlight prevents those essential photoreceptors from doing their job. The light signal must enter the eyes directly, without filtering, so the retinal ganglion cells can transmit their message clearly to the brain. It's also important to understand that you don't need to stare directly at the sun and shouldn't for eye safety. You just need to be outdoors where ambient sunlight enters your eyes from the surrounding environment. This exposure is not harmful in short durations, particularly in the morning when UV levels are lower and the sun is at a gentle angle. This idea may seem simple, but its biological impact is significant. Without sufficient morning light, your body fails to synchronize properly. When circadian misalignment becomes chronic, systems like blood pressure regulation, autonomic nervous function, and clotting dynamics become unstable. Over time, this instability increases the likelihood of stroke, especially during the vulnerable morning hours when cardiovascular events most frequently occur. Conversely, when you make it a consistent habit to step outside and allow full spectrum natural light to hit your eyes, you're reinforcing strong circadian signaling, which stabilizes those very systems. Consistency is key. This isn't about spending hours outside or overcomplicating the process. Just 5 to 10 minutes in the morning sunlight, longer if it's cloudy, is enough to initiate the desired effects. And over time, the benefits compound. The body begins to expect that signal, and the systems tied to your cardiovascular health start working in better synchrony. The result is better sleep, more stable energy, improved blood pressure patterns, and a substantially lower risk of stroke. So while it might be tempting to rely on artificial light or stay behind glass, the full biological benefit comes only from direct, unfiltered exposure to real sunlight. It's a simple, natural, and powerful way to align your health with how your body is actually designed to function. The human body is a symphony of biological rhythms, systems, and responses, each playing its part to maintain health and stability. But for this orchestra to play in harmony, it needs a conductor, something that sets the tempo and coordinates the timing of all its systems. That conductor is light. And the most powerful cue of all is the sunlight you receive in the morning. By making morning sunlight a consistent daily habit, you're doing far more than waking up. You're stabilizing and optimizing your cardiovascular, neurological, hormonal, and immune systems in ways that reduce disease risk, including stroke. Over time, every organ system in the body, from the heart to the brain to the digestive tract, operates on a circadian rhythm. These rhythms tell your body when to perform essential tasks like releasing hormones, repairing tissue, managing blood pressure, and metabolizing nutrients. When your internal systems are in sync with one another and aligned with the natural day-night cycle, your body is resilient, efficient, and capable of adapting to stress. But when these systems are misaligned, when, for example, your sleep-wake cycle is out of step with your metabolic rhythm or your stress hormones peak at the wrong time, chaos begins to accumulate beneath the surface. Over time, that chaos manifests as chronic inflammation, vascular stiffness, metabolic dysfunction, or blood pressure instability, all key precursors to stroke. Morning light acts as a unifying signal that brings all of these systems back into alignment. It initiates the proper release of cortisol, which sets off a cascade of wakefulness and metabolic readiness. It helps suppress melatonin at the right time so that the body can begin its daytime repair and regulatory processes. It sets the timing for the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of the nervous system, balancing energy expenditure with recovery. And it signals to the cardiovascular system that it's time to increase blood flow and oxygen delivery in a controlled, healthy manner. These processes are not random. They are precisely timed to the signals your brain receives from the environment, light being the most potent. Consistency in this habit is where the long-term benefits really emerge. Just as eating one healthy meal won't change your life, a single day of sunlight exposure won't instantly protect you from stroke. But repeated day after day, this habit compounds. Your body becomes trained to operate in sync with the rhythm of light and dark. And this synchronization improves everything from blood pressure stability to arterial flexibility. Studies show that individuals who follow a consistent light exposure routine have better heart rate variability, lower resting heart rates, improved glucose control, and reduced levels of inflammatory markers. These are not isolated health perks. They are part of a larger interconnected web of stroke prevention mechanisms activated by circadian alignment. What makes this even more powerful is that it doesn't require medication, supplements, or expensive treatments. It simply requires showing up for your health each morning by stepping outside, letting natural light reach your eyes, and anchoring your day with a signal your body was designed to respond to. There is no subscription, no prescription, and no barrier other than consistency. And the reward is not just improved energy or better sleep, but a profound decrease in the likelihood of experiencing a life-altering stroke. The brain, heart, and blood vessels all benefit from operating in rhythm with nature when that rhythm is disrupted by staying indoors, waking up late, or relying on artificial light. Those systems fall out of sync, but when you build the habit of exposing yourself to morning sunlight daily, you are restoring that rhythm, reinforcing healthy biological cycles, and activating protective systems that make you more resilient to one of the deadliest medical conditions known to humanity. In this sense, morning light is more than a health tip. It's a foundational practice for lifelong neurological and cardiovascular protection.